Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to Thursday night. This is the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, joined by Durst, Drew, and Max. It's your first time with us, so welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. That's pretty exciting.
Cool. So, Drew, been up to anything since our last podcast?
Not much, just grinding tape. This was kind of nice to get me to narrow in down on some of these depth guys in this class because there's just so many depth guys, and I still didn't get to everybody I wanted to because like Mitchell Evans was one that I think will probably be pretty high on my board that I didn't get to, which sucked. Bryson Nesbitt is another one that I want to hit that I haven't gotten around to, and Gavin Bartholomew. Those are the 3 that I wanted to hit that I didn't quite get to, but I think I'm pretty solid everywhere else.
Cool. And Durst, it's like I just saw you last night.
Yeah.
So
great talking defensive tackles, even better talking tight ends.
Yeah, so last night Durst was on. We did the 10 best pass rushing defensive tackles and the 10 best run stuffing defensive tackles, and turning and burning, and we're doing tight ends tonight. So we have 4 tight end boards. Durst divided his list into 2. Durst is the 2 boards you see on the left. Drew's is the second from the right, and Max's is the one that's on the far right. So, Max, your number 1 tight end is Tyler Warren, and it looks like you have a first-round grade on him. So tell us what you like about Tyler Warren and why he is number 1 on your board.
Well, I don't really think there's anything not to like. I would go so far as to say that this is since I started focusing on this position a couple years ago, this is my favorite player to come out of college football. He is one of the only tight ends that you'll really ever see that's truly dominant, both in space and in line. You're normally looking for the guys that are dynamic playmakers to just be serviceable enough in line on the line of scrimmage to play there, and to not be a total liability and cross off parts of your offense. With him, though, he's truly elite in both areas. He's both your 6th offensive lineman and your 4th wide receiver, which is truly unique. In my opinion, there are really only 2 guys like that in the NFL, in Dallas Goedert and, of course, George Kittle. So this is a really, really, really rare player. When you look at the load he shouldered in their offense, when you look at the incredible athleticism, the legitimate breakaway speed on a couple of runs, the incredible change of direction, the physical bullying at the catch point, the ability to create after the catch and be dominant both as a gadget guy in the Wildcat game and a screen threat. And then when you factor that into the fact that, their run game ran behind him, right? Whether it was outside zone, duo, counter, it was all behind Tyler Warren 1v1ing that D end. And they didn't just trust him to make those key blocks. They depended on it, and they ran behind him. So when you look at a guy that can truly engineer an offense like that, who can space out, play in line, and combine all that into one body. Because, remember, you only get 11 guys no matter what. So the more you can combine into one chess piece, the more valuable that chess piece is. And I think that he's one of the few queens on the chessboard in the game of football. And that's I I really can't say enough about this guy. I love him.
Okay, and Drew, you have Tyler Warren as number one in your board with the first round grades. What do you like about Tyler Warren?
Yeah, Warren. I mean, I think Max really covered most of the the highlight points there. It really is like not sure I've ever seen a player in all my time watching that I've never seen an offense run through one player more than Penn State's did through Tyler Warren. He was the facilitator for everything. And they had so much versatility there. All the Wildcat, the crazy packages. I don't know what shrooms they were doing in Penn State's film room on offense there, but he did all kinds of stuff. And I don't think that versatility is necessarily everything's going to translate there, because he's obviously not going to be doing the things he was doing in Penn State's offense as far as versatility goes in the NFL. But yeah, he's one of the most talented blockers I've ever watched. He's a guy that's going to crash out. He can five techniques. He can get out in space and track DBs. He can hit linebackers. There's nothing you can ask him as a blocker that he can't do. People have tried to make the separation concerns, and you're not going to find a bigger separation purist than me. If a guy can't separate, I'm not going to like him. But Warren, for his size and his athleticism level, I think this is a guy that separates about as well as he can in his frame. He's nuanced. He's creative. He understands leverages. He's great out in space. He's a great athlete. He does everything you can ask at the catch point. He knows how to use every bit of that frame that he has. He's aggressive. He's physical. Can box guys out. I don't think there's maybe a ceiling is there from an athletic perspective, but I think he's kind of the quintessential inline wide tight end prospect. You can't really ask for more aside from just maybe a better athlete. But from a technique perspective, he gives you everything you could ask for.
Okay. And then, Durst, you have two lists. So Tyler Warren is number one on a list, and Colston Loveland is number one on the list. So would you like to explain your lists, and then why Warren's number one on one and Loveland is number one on the other?
Yeah, so this year I decided to try to separate the tight ends into two different categories: the flex tight ends, the more chess piece joker type, and the guys that can actually play in line. Now, while trying to separate these, I've kind of went back and forth because I feel like some of them are complete enough that they could be in both lists. But I tried to flip a coin on some of them and then figure which one I like the best. Now certainly, so Warren is my number one tight end overall. He's also my number one inline tight end, and you guys already talked about a lot of the positives, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the negatives I see. So a lot of what we saw probably isn't going to translate to the NFL. I don't think we're going to see him, snap the ball and then go out for a pass. Where I think he had a pooch punt once, and he may have one punt in his 10 or 12-year career. And a lot of his wildcat stuff is probably not going to. He might have one wildcat snap per season or so. I've heard some people say that he might be the guy that will be the tush push guy in the huddle when people run that type of short yardage. I'm not so sure that that's going to fly for every team though. So now, of course, on the positive notes, great inline, great blocker, great size. As great as Bowers was, he was undersized. It's still the better prospect overall, but this is the better inline prospect.
Okay, and then you have what list is Loveland at the top of?
Yeah, so Loveland's at the top of my flex. So all the list starting off with Loveland is my flex tight ends, and the list with Warren's my inline wide tight ends.
Okay, and what do you like about Loveland that he's number one on that list?
So I think he's probably the better separator of the two. So what I wrote down is youth and early breakout. He's 2 years younger. Well, I don't know the exact age, but I know 2 seasons younger. Smooth route runner, creates separation, good short yardage or short area quickness. And also he comes from a pro style offense. Yeah, it was a crappy offense last year, but it's still a lot of pro concepts the last couple of years that he got to experience under Harbaugh for those 2 years and then last year.
Okay. And Max, you have Colston Loveland as tight end 2. So what do you like about Loveland that you have a first round grade on him and put him at tight end 2?
Yeah, I mean Loveland's great as well. And a lot of that I really agree with, especially the bit about the pro style offense, right? You're going to get a lot of translatable routes, so it's evaluatable film. It's not like, Jalen Conyers was a little bit tough because I don't think that was an offense that was at least tough to evaluate, because that was not really an offense that's used to a second tight end, right? You look at their other guy, Mason Tharp, and there's a lot of evaluatable inline stuff there, but like the second one was a little a little bit, what do we do with this guy? He's kind of like, he's run straight lines a lot. So I love that point about the Michigan offense, especially their national championship year when they were a little bit more put together. For Loveland, I really like his ability to truly get in and out of breaks at a really elite level. He's fast, I think, in a way that's underrated, but like you said, the short area quickness is fantastic. The details in the routes are excellent. The athleticism is there, and he doesn't really lose the points for being a quote unquote flex only guy. I think that there's a huge difference between flex guys and flex only guys, the guys who truly cannot play in line and the guys who can play out and play in line. I think Loveland is the latter category. He's definitely minimum 6'3", 245. We'll see what he lists at the combine. I know he's listed at 6'5", 250. But that's good enough, right? You look at Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, those are guys who can block in line at a solid level. Maybe not elite level, but they aren't needed to. They are not limitations when they're put there. And that's really all I ask of a guy like Loveland. And I think that he has the size, strength, and workable technique to get to either be there or get there, which makes him not a limitation, right? Not just a wide receiver. But when he is at wide receiver, he can do it, right? He can separate at all three receiver positions. He's a legitimate mover. He's a legitimate route runner. He's sort of on the precipice of passing my wide receiver test. I'm sure I'll get to that at some point, but he doesn't need to because he's got legit size and he can play in line. So he is one of your rare, true chess piece, movable tight ends. I mean, I think Warren is as well, but Loveland is definitely very much in that McBride, Laporta mold.
Okay, and Drew, you have Loveland as tight end too as well, with a first round grade. So what do you like about Loveland?
Yeah, I love Colston Loveland. He's really, really close to Tyler Warren for me, closer than I've seen on a lot of people's boards. And that's not me being low on Warren. It's just me being that high on Loveland. Like I said, I'm such a separation purist. Anybody that can separate at the level he does and is the kind of technician and route runner he is, I love those guys. The thing that's been such a refreshing watch about Loveland is I feel like he's one of the first guys in a long time that I've watched that actually is justifiably athletic for how small his size is. Like that's what makes me mad when I watch guys like Harold Fannin or whatever. It's like if you're going to be 230, you better move like 230. And if you're going to be, like Fannin and Gadsden's a little bit better about that, but even him to an extent where like you got to be able to move if you're going to be that small. And Warren Loveland, is plenty athletic enough for the frame he has. He's such a nuanced and creative route runner. He's so explosive out of his breaks. He's fluid. He's a great mover. Probably the most polished tight end prospect I've ever watched from a route running perspective. And again, the size concerns are there. Not the best blocker in the world, but he's willing. That you get points on that for at least he's willing to get up there and get his face caved in by a linebacker or a 5 technique or whatever it is. He'll at least try. But yeah, he's plenty good at the catch point for his size too. Even having a smaller frame, he still knows how to use it. He can box guys out. He can get up there and be aggressive at the catch point and come down with things. So yeah, I'm much higher on Loveland than most people are, even with him being a first round grade for most people.
And Durst, you have Mason Taylor as your number 2 inline tight end, right?
I do. So he's number 4 overall, but number 2 in terms of the inline.
Yeah. So what do you like about Mason Taylor as an inline tight end?
I think he's got a complete skill set. He's a guy that I think has the naturally thick build and stature to be in line. Not everybody in this class does, but he's got enough athleticism that he can do all the flex out things. So of course, I think everybody by now knows his NFL bloodlines. Dad Jason Taylor was a Hall of Fame defensive end. And he's also very battle tested. As far as I can tell, he started all but one game of his career, and of course that's against SEC competition. Starting off as a freshman at LSU. Now, there's a few things I didn't like about him as much. His yards per route run, YAC, best tackles forced were not great. Ran a lot of routes that were mostly like in-flat routes. I think he's a little heavy-legged, so I don't think he's going to blow the doors off the combine. I also thought he'd come in at about 260, and I think he only came in at about 250 at the Senior Bowl. Now, some people have said that he doesn't have, he's not a really good blocker. I actually put a tweet out during the season of him blocking Dylan Stewart. So, for those that are just focused on this draft season, not everybody may know who he is, but he was probably one of the top 5 freshmen in all of America, defensive end for South Carolina. And he had a really nice rep against Dylan Stewart, who probably will be a top 5, top 10 pick here in a couple of years.
Okay. And Max, you have Elijah Arroyo of Miami as your tight end 3. So what do you like about Arroyo?
I actually got Arroyo at 6. I think the lists are flipped there.
Oh, okay. So apparently I did
That's
not.
Drew.
Did I flip you and Drew?
I think I think I'm on the far right is my list.
Okay. So Drew, what do you like about Arroyo that you have him at 3?
Yeah, Arroyo, he's been one of my favorite watches again this draft season. He's been a top 50 guy for me from pretty early on in this class. He was one of my favorite guys going into the Senior Bowl. I'm glad he had such a great week in Mobile. I know the medical concerns are there. That's the biggest thing holding him back. We'll see how he comes out of Indy, how his medicals are looking. But yeah, he's such the good athlete. The long speed is really unusual for tight end. I'm not sure I've seen a tight end with the kind of track speed that he has. You'll see. I mean, guys will get angles on him, DBs, safeties, corners, and he just flat out burns them. He's a great blocker. I wonder what he weighs in at because he looks small and thin on film, but he has so much pop in his hands. He's such a great blocker. He can hold his own against linebackers, 5 techniques, whatever it may be. He's a plenty solid blocker. I think he's a guy that can come in and play in an inline role in an NFL offense pretty quickly. He's a great separator, great technician, strong hands, big enough body at the catch point. He's just a guy that has a really great mix of everything you want in an inline tight end. So I think if the medical's clear, he's a guy that should be a pretty early to mid second round pick. I think he's a pretty easy top 50 grade for me.
Okay, and Max, you have Helm 3rd. What do you like about Gunnar Helm that you have him 3rd on your board?
The thing I kept coming back to watching him is that when you look at what tight ends look like in the NFL, they look a lot like him. He's so smooth as a mover, and I really think about the route running and the movement very different from how I evaluate wide receivers generally. And when you look at the types of routes that tight ends are really asked to win on at the NFL level, he excels at them. He's got the perfect movement profile for it. He's very smooth. He's got great feel for space. He's slippery a little bit side to side after the catch. Now he doesn't have elite foot quickness. His foot quickness is much better than it was late last season and early this year. I think he improved a little bit in his confidence as a route runner, which allowed him to play faster. But he's still very much a Y tight end to me, just in terms of his body type and movement profile. Again, very smooth, settle into space, work in the seam, up and overs, deep sails, that kind of stuff. Maybe not as much of the choice route, foot fire, quick slants that you'll get from Colston Loveland, but he's very much a tight end. He's got the body. He's legit 6'5", 250. He's very strong. He's got a very, very heavy lower half, heavy hands. His blocking technique is a disaster, but as a blocker overall, I think the raw materials are there. It's really, really common to see guys go into the NFL not really knowing how to block, and as long as they have the raw materials, it can be worked out. He's got, like I said, he's got heavy hands. Every once in a while, when he gets the technique right, he's able to control and move defenders off the ball on the line of scrimmage. So he's got the right stuff. He's got the ingredients. And I think that, you look at like a Cole Kmet type player who's really spending most of his time attached to the line, can play in space a little bit, but is really going to do those tight end things, right? He's going to pop in the seam off play action. He's going to work on linebackers. He's going to expose those mismatches while being credible enough in line to actually get them. So I love the raw materials on this guy. I think the upside is really, really high. And again, he's what high-end NFL tight ends just look like.
And then Durst, Harold Fannin, you have rated relatively high. I believe that color code is a round 2-3 grade.
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying athletic testing for me is a really big part of the tight end evaluation. I don't want to get into the whole underwear Olympics part, but two positions I take this a little bit more seriously. Cornerback, yeah, I mean you got to be fast enough, and then tight end. Shout out to Mathbomb and Kentley Platty for all of his work he does with the relative athletic scores. But he's put out a lot of evidence there that tight end is one of the more athletically dependent positions. I say all that because I'm not 100% sure if Harold Finan is going to test out as a great athlete. So I have some size and athleticism concerns. Feel because of that he might be limited to 12 personnel groupings. But there's a lot of 12 personnel groupings in the NFL nowadays. In fact, it's one of my favorite formations to run an offense through. So yeah, he's my number 5 tight end overall and my number 3 flex tight end.
Okay, and then Drew, the next on your list is Terrence Ferguson. So what do you like about Ferguson more than the guys under him that has you put him at 5?
Yeah, and really quickly just to finish up on Gunnar Helm, I think Max nailed that one. But just as far as him looking like tight end, if I had to put like my mortgage on a guy that would play in the NFL for a decade in this whole draft class, it's Gunnar Helm. Like he's going to be a guy that lives as a tight end for the next 15 years, regardless. He's like built in a lab to be the tight end. But yeah, Ferguson and Mason Taylor have been one like of my biggest debates that have flipped back and forth on in my board this whole draft process. They've been really, really difficult for me because I feel like they're so even for me. And Mason Taylor's been one that I've struggled with. He's been one of my hardest evals because people seem to like him so much. I've seen him in a lot of top 50s, top 75s, and I just can't quite get there with him. I think you see flashes of the athleticism, but I think there's some plays where he just looks flat out slow on routes. And I don't know if that's in an attempt to be a tempo route runner, and he just can't really get that feel down. Because there's some plays where he can vertically separate and be a burner down the sideline. And the next play, he looks like he's running a 4.9. It's I think he gets a bad rep for as a blocker. I think Taylor's a fine blocker. And I'm kind of gone on a tangent about Mason Taylor instead of Ferguson here. But yeah, as far as Terrence Ferguson goes, he's a great blocker. I thought in most of the reps that I saw with him, he can come in and be a dominant inline pass protector too. He came in against Jack Sawyer, Abdul Carter, and JT Tuimoloau in the Big Ten championship in the playoff game, and he shut those guys down in the few reps he had in pass pro. I think he's a really sharp route runner and sudden route runner out of his breaks. Not the most twitchy, explosive athlete. I think he's got the long speed to be serviceable in the NFL. He's separated vertically when he gets those opportunities in Oregon's offense. But I think he's a developed route runner. He's quick. He's sudden and sharp, which kind of makes up for the lack of twitchiness to a certain extent. I think he's fine at the catch point. Ferguson is just good at a lot of things. He's not necessarily elite, but he's just kind of the jack of all trades. He's going to give you like a good low end tight end 1, high end tight end 2 at every level, every facet of his game.
And where is Ferguson on your board right now, Drew?
He is, I think he's in the 90s somewhere. And again, it's probably still going to fluctuate because I'm just further behind than I should be. But he's probably going to end up like 10-ish spots outside of my top 100 if I had to guess.
Okay. And then, Max, it looks like the next player on your list that we haven't covered yet is – well, I was about to say Terrence Ferguson, but that was who Drew just did. So why don't you talk about Taylor and Max, talk about Taylor and Ferguson as your 4 and 5 and what you like about them that has them that high.
Yeah, like Drew said, these guys are just like, they're so close. I mean, I'm honestly like the combine to me is probably just going to determine who the tiebreaker is because it's just so even. They're both really, really solid to me. The reason I put Taylor ahead now is just because I thought he had a better Senior Bowl, and that was a tiebreaker to me. Just because if I'm ranking these guys, I'm looking for tiebreakers at this point. I love them both. I think they're really solid. Mason Taylor is young, and this is such a developmental position, especially from college to the NFL, because college tight ends in general just aren't very good, if we're being honest, and they get so much better. You look at George Kittle, who was, just a bag of tools at Iowa. He had some good moments, but like he was nothing like what he became. It's really the most developmental position from college to the NFL, in my opinion, there is. So I think with Taylor's youth, the fact that he was able to step in at LSU, be really good right away, is solid inline but developing. I think He's got better hand placement than some of the guys that struggle with it, but it still needs a lot of improvement. I think his lower half is strong, which is the raw tool that I'm really looking for as a blocker, and he's got the size. As far as the athleticism and the route running goes, yeah, I mean, I've seen the same thing as well, right? Like there's that little bit of inconsistency with what looks like how dynamic he is. And I think if you look at him at the Senior Bowl, he looked like a freak. The way he was separating on guys, the way he was pulling away, the way he was getting in and out of breaks explosively is just stuff that we haven't necessarily seen on film. But what we have seen on film is the smoothness, which is really the number one movement skill for a tight end, especially a Y. And he's really smooth in his routes. He's got a good feel, natural hands. Okay at the catch point, could be better, but I think that that's something that's going to come as he gets older, as the blocking, as is the blocking. And I think it's very possible that it becomes a little bit more explosive as well. So I think that if this is his starting point, and I think the fact that he can get a little bit better, potentially even a lot better, those are all reasons I had him ahead of Ferguson, in addition to just that Senior Bowl tiebreaker, because I think that there is some serious untapped upside there in addition to a solid floor. Ferguson I really love as well. Like you said, Drew, great call on the pass protection. There's a reason that he is a very good pass protector and an inconsistent run blocker, and it's that his lower half, like Taylor, is incredibly strong. His anchor is gifted, but his hand placement as a run blocker is inconsistent. He's a huge lunger, so he'll overextend with his shoulders and arms into the block, into the point of contact, which will get him over leveraged and off balance, which will allow defenders to get better position and bench him up and forklift him. So if he improves that, I think he can become a very good inline blocker in the run game, because like you said, in pass protection, and this exists for Gunnar Helm as well. Gunnar Helm's pass protection is really, really good because he's got an elite lower half. His hand placement is inconsistent. So those are just things that can really easily be developed at the NFL level. Great mover, quick feet, silky smooth, not great at the catch point, but that's, kind of a cherry on top to me. He's just good all over. Like you said, just solid guy.
Okay. And Durst, you have Mitchell Evans and Luke Lachey on your inline tight end list at 3 and 4. So what do you like about them?
Yeah, and they're actually 9 and 10 if you combine the two boards, just for completeness sake there. But I do like both of them. I mean, they were actually some of my favorite tight ends for the 2024 draft until they both got hurt during 2023. So there was a ton of good tight ends that got hurt in 2023: Gadsden, Lachey, Mitchell Evans. And so I'll just go with Mitchell Evans. So he's really good at contested catches. He uses his size well. He can bully through defenders. He's a reliable underneath option who can secure off-target throws. And you especially saw that in the 2023 season when it wasn't Riley Leonard, but the Notre Dame's that last quarterback. He got lots of off-target throws that he would either, catch it behind him, behind his head, So he just never got quite to that Michael Mayer level that I think some people thought he was going to develop into. And I think a lot of that had to do with the injury. So he had a torn ACL and MCL that ended his 2023 season after just 8 games. But he also had I think a fractured foot in 2022. So then with Lachey, and both of these, again, I think are better for inline purposes because of their size, but they got enough movement skills for maybe a Dalton Schultz where, you can still get out and run some routes. They're not just pure inline blockers or anything. But Lachey, good size and frame, good movement skills. He's got a certain amount of route savviness to him. Good hands that makes him a reliable target. And of course, he comes from the Iowa tight end factory. So, it seems like everybody from Iowa outplays their draft position. And so even if this guy goes in the 5th round, I think he's going to be probably if not an eventual starter, at least a really solid number 2. But yeah, he suffered a broken leg in Iowa's 3rd game of the season in 2023. And perhaps he's just not all the way back this year. And of course, Iowa's really run heavy this last year as well.
Okay. So let's pause. We've gotten about halfway through everybody's list. So Durst, you want to take a minute, introduce yourself, and let everybody know how they can find your content?
Yeah, so you find me at Durst at NFL Draft on Twitter/X, and I do a bunch of tweets, sometimes some threads on various different positions. So this week or so, I'm working on tight ends.
Cool. And Drew.
Yeah, you can find me at Iron City Film on Twitter or X. That's where I do pretty much everything. Just talking ball. All my scouting reports usually go there when I finish those up. My big board will go up there eventually whenever I finally get it together, get that done, because I'm so behind all the time. But yeah, just mainly here and on Draft Professor every Tuesday night with Parker. And whenever I get to do a guest appearance on shows like these, I'm always happy to contribute whenever I can. But yeah, just mainly Twitter, X, and here.
Awesome. And Max.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MaxToscano1, like it says there in the little icon. But I also host a Substack called Remember the Tight Ends, which is dedicated specifically to these guys, right? These guys in the NFL, in college, really breaking down the position, I think, in a way that does not get as much shine in general film breakdowns or football content more broadly. You can also find me writing about LSU football, specifically doing film breakdowns at And the Valley Shook on SB Nation. And I do a lot of film breakdowns on my Twitter as well, just in the forms of threads, individual stuff, all that. But yeah, Remember the Tight Ends is really getting going, just kind of hitting its stride right now in draft season, talking about these guys. So, I do a lot of breakdowns of the details of inline blocking, tight end roles, tight end usage, really, really getting in the weeds with it.
That's a great follow. Be sure to check that out.
Yes. I found Remember the Tight Ends as I was literally about 2 minutes before we went live on the podcast. So I've already followed Remember the Tight Ends. That was actually really catchy. I
did not come up with it. Somebody smarter than I did was the genius behind that one.
Well, I've always been told the key to professional success is to be in a room with people smarter than me. So that's why I keep adding more people to the Draft Professor, right? I just need more people smarter than me. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No I in Fanatic. It is the same on X, Twitter, and YouTube. If you go to the YouTube specifically, there's a playlist for every position. So this podcast will obviously go to the tight end playlist. But if you listen to that playlist, you will see other tight end big boards. And if you rewind even further, you will see people giving scouting reports on these tight ends. So if you want more than 1 minute about Tyler Warren, there would be 2 people for about 8 minutes debating Tyler Warren and kind of what his game is, maybe some of the reps that he had, and kind of where they were stacking him during, let's say, preseason or midseason scouting reports. So if you have a chance and you want to learn more about the players, definitely check out the YouTube. But I also want to promo the channel because we have 2 podcasts every day. So this one's at 7. We got Newt, Owen, and myself at 9. Every Thursday. And then tomorrow we have a 32 general manager mock draft. So we will have NBS Media on the mic. We will have Dale from Bengals and Brews on the mic. And we will have David from Philadelphia Eagles News on the podcast announcing every pick for the first 3 rounds with fans drafting for their teams. So channel has content every day. So just hit that subscribe button so you know when we go live. But there's going to be draft content coming at you every day on this channel. So hit that like, subscribe, and thank you very much. That being said, let's get back to the tight end big board. So, Drew, the next player on your list that has not been discussed is Thomas Fidone from Nebraska. So what do you like about Thomas Fidone?
Yeah, I feel like he's another guy that kind of fits in that Helm and Warren role we're talking about, where they just are a tight end. You just look at them and you know they're a tight end. He's another guy that had a good Senior Bowl week. I thought he was solid. He was one of the better tight ends in Mobile. He's not really outstanding at much. He's a pretty underwhelming athlete. He's a serviceable blocker, not anything that's going to show up as a highlight on the scouting report. But I thought he was a pretty decent route runner, pretty solid separator, especially for the level of athleticism that he has. Solid at the catch point. Yeah, it just feels like a guy that's pretty middle of the road at everything. And one of the last of this group, at least that I've been able to watch so far, of the inline wide tight end guys that can just be serviceable at a lot of things. So not a super like polarizing scouting report, but it's just a solid tight end too.
Okay. And then Max, I think the next player in your list that we haven't talked about is Elijah. Oh wait, we've already talked about Arroyo. It would be Moliki Matavao. No, I didn't do that well. Moliki Matavao from UCLA.
Yeah, I mean, he's another bag of tools. He's really, really big. He's 6'5", 265, which is just, I mean, that's dream size. That's everything, I'm really looking for. He's really smooth in and out of breaks. He moves like, a really good tight end moves, right? He's smooth in and out of breaks. He's not super explosive, but I don't really require that. That's what the receivers are for. He is, he can head up and over. He is, I think, has the ability, or at least the tools, to be a bully at the catch point. In and out of breaks, though, is where it's at with him. He's really good there. The blocking is a mess, but like Gunnar Helm, it's hand placement. He's a hugger, so he'll get the hands placed on the outsides of the shoulders, which will allow defenders to get in on his chest and control him. If he fixes that, he's going to be dominant because he's huge. He's incredibly strong. When he does get it right, every once in a while, he will drive guys off the ball. He is strong as hell. He's long. I think his arm length is going to come in at really, really good if he hasn't measured it already. And yeah, it's just he's a bag of tools. And you look at the guys that are really good in the NFL, you look back at what they were in college, you kind of see guys who are bags of tools who have shown it all at different times on tape and then just put it together with proper NFL coaching of the position. And I think that this is a guy that has a chance to really be a dominant Y. And to me, the Ys are just so much more valuable because they are the only position that can only be played by a tight end. And there's no opportunity cost replacing them with another position. So you get a guy like that who can block in line and threaten as a receiver and has that kind of tool set. He has the chance to be really, really valuable. I thought he had a nice Senior Bowl week as well. The blocking issues didn't go away, but those are going to be a longer fix. The athleticism and route running were really good, and I think that he's got the profile.
Okay, and Dersh, you have Oronde Gadsden from Syracuse, I believe, is the next tight end that we haven't discussed yet.
Well, one, I really like Fedone. When I did my list, I don't think he was on there. Like, I actually had sort of
You
sent
are
a message
correct.
out to add him to the list, and I guess I never went back. So I actually really like him. He was actually the second ranked high school tight end in the nation coming out. But his big red flag is I read somewhere he's had 10 surgeries. Now, I don't
Yeah,
know
he's
if
got
all
major
of them-
medical issues too.
Yeah. So I mean, I have him as a fifth rounder mainly because of the injuries. I actually like him a little bit better than that. But there's a chance he might go undrafted if these injury history is just too great. But of course, this has been the theme of this class: a lot of injuries for everybody from Arroyo to Fedone. So I'm sorry. So who were you talking again?
Oronde Gadsden.
Oh, Gadsden, that's right. So of course, Gadsden had his big breakout season a couple of years ago, and like we were talking about, he got injured in 2023. So his was a Liz Frank injury, and so that knocked him out for the season, and he came back heavier. So the last 2 years, I've been thinking about putting him on my preseason big board on the tight end list. I'm like, I can't count this guy's a tight end. Maybe I'll put him in my receiver list, and then there's always like going to be like 10 other people ahead. So he hasn't really made my top 10 preseason list, but now he came in, I think, 247 at the Shrine game this last January. So I think he's finally got to the point where he's a legitimate tight end now. And because he spent so much time at receiver, I think he's the best route runner of the receivers. Oh, I'm sorry, of the tight ends. So I have, best routes in class, a mismatch creator, length and catch radius, and depth at two positions. I don't think he's going to be like a top 100 pick. I just don't think the NFL is going to see him that way. So if he's like, say, a fourth or fifth rounder, he might be able to be your fourth tight end and your sixth receiver or something along those lines. And as a rookie, and then eventually work his way up the depth chart.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I will add about Gadsden that is really interesting. If you look back at some guys, namely Josh Oliver, who was a receiver in college and came out to be a pure receiving tight end, who is now 265 and arguably the best blocking tight end in the NFL. So a lot can change with these guys. And so with Gadsden putting on that kind of weight, there is every chance that if he can continue to do it, his best ball at tight end is ahead of him, like you said.
Okay, and then Max, you want to keep going on Brenningstool?
Yeah, that's still Drew's
Oh,
list there.
I'm looking at the wrong list. I'm looking at the wrong list.
I got you, yeah. Brenningstool, another guy that had a pretty solid week in Mobile. I thought him and Gadsden are pretty much neck and neck, like right at the same for me. And they're more victims of my grading scale because, as evidenced by Jackson Hawes being on my list at all, I just really love guys who can block. And that's my grading scale reflects that. But I think if you're going to get a guy who is a pure, and of course, these guys can always put on weight, fix their blocking, and they could play a completely different role in the future when they develop. But as watching these guys, how they were in college, Gadsden and Brenningstool both were good at what they did. You know, there's a very small niche role that they're playing, but that big slot receiver, they're good at that. They're both great athletes. They're both solid route runners, really impressive separation ability, nuanced, creative, all the things I've said previously about some of these other route running tight ends. And I think, they're all very one dimensional. They all play that one very niche role, but they play it well. So these are not guys that I would take, super high just because they're such a limited role you can play, but they're very good at what they do. They're great at that big red zone threat big slot receiver F tight end role.
Yep.
Okay, and then Max, you have Benjamin Urosek next.
Yeah, he's a guy that is really interesting because he was arguably Georgia's third tight end this year, which seems really bad. But again, when you look back at some of these guys that are in the NFL and succeeding now and what they were in college, it's pretty stark difference. He was a big time portal ad for Georgia, big time. He was really, really good as a pass catcher at Stanford, one of the best in the country at his position. Super smooth, great route runner, seam stretcher, good catch radius, all the stuff you look for in a tight end. This year as a blocker at Georgia, at the start of the year, he was just atrocious. He was awful at Stanford because he was, arguably their best pass catcher. So he wasn't really focused on it. He was terrible. But if you look at his progression as the season goes on, he improved. And I had I think it was one of my first Remember the Tight Ends posts on that Twitter account was about how much he improved. He started the year as a liability, ended the year as a reliable inline blocker on defensive ends. And the numbers didn't show up for him this year as a pass catcher, but they've been there in the past. We know what he is as a pass catcher, and now he's kind of added a little bit of, another little infinity stone there as a blocker. If he just puts those two separate seasons together, at some point, he's really, really, really good overall. So I think that we've seen the puzzle pieces in separate points, and I think that the upside, if he puts it together, is legit enough for him to be on this list.
Okay, and Durst, you have a few players with fifth-round grades or better to cover. That would be Prieskorn, Hawes, and Nesbitt.
Yeah, sure. If I could take a second and talk about oh crap, it's the guy's name there. About Urosek. So my understanding was that the way Stanford's academics run, he didn't make it to spring camp. He didn't make it until like late into summer. So he's kind of a late in the summer ad, and so he never really made it up what was an outstanding depth chart in Georgia. I actually thought that he was going to be the one that inherited the Bowers role, the sort of end arounds and screens and some of these down the seam routes, because you can see that in Stanford. There was a couple years ago, he had like 5 runs against USC where he would do these little. He would be on the end of the end of line of scrimmage and he'd kind of come around. So of course that didn't happen at all. So I think he's fallen down most people's out of sight, out of mind. Again, as he said, he was like the 3rd tight end at Georgia's depth chart. But I think he's better than that. So he's got he's got a lot of hand in the dirt snaps in the Stanford tape. His best season in terms of pass receptions all the way back in 2021 before he hurt his shoulder in 2023. I've seen him make some huge catch radius catches. So he's a player I like. I'm just not so sure where he's going to be seen by the NFL. And then which ones were you asking me about then? And
Prescorn, Hawes, and Nesbitt.
Okay.
And you're also really high on Conyers relative to the rest of the group. So if you want to talk about Conyers, you could do that too.
Yeah. So for Nesbitt, he was awesome when Drake May was there. So per PFF, his 1,092 receiving yards over May's 2 seasons that he was the quarterback, he actually led all returning tight ends coming into 2024. Now, of course, Drake May left. They did not replace him with an equal talent, and the UNC's offense just was pretty dreadful. So he is a tall, long target with good hands, concentration, with field stretching ability. Now he has something like a 70% slot usage. He is really more of a long slot a big slot than a true tight end. Long, lanky build, and he basically is lacking any kind of like play strength or blocking ability. And then when we go to Conyers, I think one of you guys mentioned this. A tough read. It's tough to really evaluate him. He was off the field a lot because they used a different tight end as a more of a traditional role. I watched him a little bit when he was in Arizona State, and he was doing a lot of Wildcat snaps. I think he had 44 Wildcat snaps in 2023. I came into the year kind of thinking maybe he's more like I don't know if either of you guys remember Bucky Hodges, former Virginia Tech tight end who did a lot of certain amount of quarterbacking and in Wildcat snaps. So he's a 2-time transfer, but Arizona State, but also in Oklahoma, and he's got a lot of missed tackle force ability. I'm just not so sure how this is going to translate. He's got a good PFF grade when it comes to blocking, but I'm not so sure that grade matches the tape either. So I've heard he's supposed to be a really good athlete. So I'm actually kind of surprised I'm higher than anybody else on that because I actually kind of thought I didn't really like him that much. But and then there was one more you wanted to talk about, right? Or?
Yeah, so I'm looking. So have we done Hawes yet?
Right. So one thing that's kind of interesting, a stat that may have slipped past people, but he actually leads all college draft eligible tight ends in missed tackles forced per attempt. Now, he's got a very small sample size. He had 3 missed tackle forced of 16 receptions. But he also combines that maybe hidden ability with some really good blocking skills. So he may or may not be able to to translate into a pass catching weapon. I don't think NFL teams are going to view him that way. They may be surprised though. But anyway, he's definitely got some blocking chops to him.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think have we covered everybody that's on your list? And when I say that, I'm asking all 3 of you that at the same time. I think we have.
I think everybody on my list is done. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add one note about Mitchell Evans though? Because I want to be fully fair to him. If he didn't have such severe injury concerns, he would absolutely be in my top 5. He is awesome. But this is a position where all of these guys, especially the guys that are going to block, are more injury prone than the average player. You look at tight ends, they are nicked up all the time. Anybody who plays fantasy knows that. So when you have huge pre-existing injury concerns, that's a huge red flag, but it's not really indicative of what he is as a player. I think he's awesome.
Yeah, I've heard great things about Evans. He's one of the guys that I wish was on this list the most. I just haven't gotten around to watching him yet, unfortunately, but I have heard great things. And as far as Jackson Hollis go, I'd love to dote on that guy for a minute just because, like my guy James Foster on Twitter that I'm sure everybody here knows, and we had him on the podcast a week or two ago. In his scouting report of him, he said, not a very big route tree, but not really worth flushing out, which is kind of exactly wraps him up well. He's not a good athlete, not a great route runner, not good at the catch point. He doesn't do anything well, but this guy blocks his ass off. He wakes up and just with pure hatred for linebackers and 5 techniques and anyone that's going to be in his range. He will down block a 5 technique into the Gatorade coolers all day long. I don't know how high you draft a guy that you're drafting to be a purely one-dimensional blocker, basically an extra offensive tackle. But I've never seen someone block at the tight end position the level that Jackson Hollis does. It's one of the most obscure, like high level traits in a guy, because I've never seen somebody be so one dimensional at one thing, but he is so damn good at that one thing.
He's going to play for a long time for that.
Yeah, exactly.
A long time.
He'll be a 15-year guy.
And there was one rep I was watching yesterday. I actually meant to make a video on it today, but I didn't get around to it. I might do it tomorrow, where where Ashton Gillott was head up on him, and I forgot what they were running, but he was down blocking him, and he just blocked him across the other hash. Like it was, and then he buried him, laid on top of him well after the play expired. Like that just tells you everything you need to know.
Is there any other tight ends that anybody wants to mention? I think we've covered everybody that you guys had as a round 5 or better grade.
Yeah, one guy that actually was on my list that we didn't get to is C.J. Dupree. So a Maryland transfer who broke out in 2022, transferred to Alabama. A good special teams standout, was starting tight end role at Alabama. More of a 6 offensive lineman, somewhat unproven as a receiver. I think we have some questionable athleticism. But it started getting me thinking, could he possibly be the Tip Ryman of this year's class? So nobody saw Tip Ryman, being drafted as high as he did, but he's this sort of blocker. And like some of the blockers, he's got the size for it too. So you can kind of see it translating there. So Tip Ryman, maybe Drew Sample is another guy that was drafted a little higher a few years ago that we maybe didn't see coming. And that's the guy that I kind of want to at least kind of throw out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's my comparison for Dupree as well. I think he's another one like Hawes who's going to play for a long time. And the NFL is in desperate need of tight ends who can block in line, especially those who can do literally anything catching the ball. Like it's at that point, it's a cherry on top for guys like that, which is why Hawes, Dupree are going to play. I mean, forever.
Yeah, Dupree just barely missed my cutoff. He's like a high 6th for me. So
yeah, and I was going to point out that if you're in like round 5. And you're looking for, we need a player that can make the roster, right? That's where you take your blocking tight end because you're going to get a 10-year career out of him, right? And anything you get in the passing game is a cherry on top.
Exactly.
Right? I think to what you said there, Max. So, but I mean, we could sit here, we could chat for a little bit, but if there's any other tight ends that you guys want to talk about, we can.
I got a curveball for you if you guys are ready for it.
Go for it.
DJ Uiagalelei.
Oh, I've been saying this for like 2 years. Yes, I'm absolutely on board.
So my comp for him was Logan Thomas, for obvious reasons, and so Logan Thomas, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, was a quarterback in college at Virginia Tech, who ended up, I think maybe like 6th round pick or so for the Washington Redskins / Commanders, and then eventually became a very good tight end. He's got a very similar size, frame, and there's no way DJ is going to be a quarterback in the NFL.
No doubt. I've been like, as a tight end guy, I'm always circling these big quarterbacks like vultures above a dying animal, just waiting for them to make the switch. Like I've got my eyes on Anthony Richardson right now too, big time. Just one more bad year, man.
That's a good one.
Insane.
That's an expensive tight end conversion, right? Because you spent a 1st round pick.
Well, not if I'm another team.
Well, yeah, after the contract.
Not if I'm another team, but at the end of that rookie deal. But like Or but like, yeah, DJU is such a good call because I've been looking at him ever since his Clemson career started going south. I mean, this guy's 6'5", 245 already. So yeah, I love it, love it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'd love to circle back to Mason Taylor really quickly, just because we have a resident LSU guy here too. I'd love to hear some insight from a guy that's surrounded that. I think, and I'm not an anti-projection guy. I love a high ceiling projection, evaluation, which I think is what a lot of Mason Taylor is projection, because his usage at LSU was so questionable for me. I feel like so much of the time, his route tree was so limited for a guy that I thought flashed some pretty nice separation ability. He ran pretty much only seams, flats, hitches in most of the stuff I watched. But I just, it feels like for a guy that flashed such great, explosive athleticism and separation ability, and he's a pretty developed route runner from the limited stuff that I saw in the route tree. But I thought a lot of it was limited by just LSU's kind of strange usage of him. So Max, I know you're much more in that room.
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons for this. One, 2 years ago, if he were going to run anything else, he'd be taking targets from Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., which is not going to work. And Kyron Lacy was really good in the seams as well, and kind of on a lot of those slot routes. So they needed him to play the Y, and there just weren't. You're just not going to take away, like, the whole offense was, we're going to throw seams to Malik Neighbors. We're going to throw slot fades to Malik Neighbors. We're going to throw access hitches to Brian Thomas on the outside. We're going to throw go balls to both those guys. And all we need Mason Taylor to do is the Y stuff, right? And this is why I view so much of the wide receiver type route tree as extraneous and kind of a cherry on top for the Y guys like Gunnar Helm, even though he can do some of it. It just wasn't necessary schematically because that's what the wide receivers are for. And they had some pretty good ones. Last year, LSU's run game was a disaster, and they didn't know what to do schematically, and they desperately needed him in line because without Jaden Daniels, they didn't have somebody who could just read the end. So they needed to block the end, and they needed him to do it, which takes him out of the slot or out wide, which is where you would get a lot of those routes from. So he ended up just kind of being stuck by necessity in the Y. And as a result, I think did not get the ability to kind of work a lot of those more complex wide receiver routes just because like he was needed at tight end. Which is a part of why I think he has a lot of untapped upside, just because of he was there for necessity, and again because you're not taking slot fade, you're not taking choice route targets away from Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, and I did not get to highlight his ball tracking ability, which I thought was some of the best stuff for him. Maybe in this class, Helm was probably the only one giving him a run for his money when it comes to that. But his ability to track balls over his shoulder down the sideline was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
Like that rep against in the A&M game, that first touchdown from that unreal Nussmeier throw down in the red zone was he's gifted at the catch point. One of the better guys in this class when it comes to physicality at the catch point and tracking.
Yeah, you remember that the 2022 Alabama game in his freshman year when he went up and mossed that dude for that touchdown on that high corner on the back pylon.
Yes.
At the end of the fourth quarter from Daniels. That was one of he had such a great game, obviously. And a lot of going back to some of the usage, a lot of the flat stuff as well, was just kind of their inside zone RPO framework with Jaden Daniels. So what they would do is they would read the end a lot, and then they would read the support defender. So it's basically triple option principles, right? So you have your dive key and your pitch key. The end would be the quote unquote dive key, and then you would have either a safety or an outside linebacker, or whoever the overhang is. If he stayed in, you flip to Taylor. If he goes out with Taylor, Daniels kept behind him. So it was just a good constraint for them off their inside zone game. It was more of a schematic thing. If you go back to the Cincinnati offenses in 2021, they were doing all that all the time with Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley. It's just a schematic thing.
Yeah.
The one thing I realized that I made a mistake on is that I meant to have Gunnar Helm on the Y tight end list, and I think as I was transposing everything back and forth. So, yeah, I mean, I do think he's got like a 70% usage in terms of being an inline kind of guy. So I want to hear about one more guy, Malik Carr, the transfer out of Purdue and Michigan State. He's either a fifth or sixth year player, plays last season in Houston, did not put up big numbers, but he's a big guy, like close to 270, is what I expect him to measure in. I don't think he got a Senior Bowl or a Shrine Bowl invite. So he might be a priority free agent type, but he actually played on the Michigan State basketball team for a season, and he's a really good athlete for his size. But not a lot of production there. He is a huge body. Maybe something to at least keep an eye on.
Wasn't he on that team with Keon Coleman too? I know Coleman was on one of those teams.
Probably so, yeah. So because 2024 he's in Houston, 2022 and 23 he was on Michigan State, and so that would have been Keon Coleman's last year at Michigan State. They would have been together then.
Yeah, so they were basketball teammates too. I guess.
Yep. Yeah, oh, see him right there. So that's going to be like one of Brandon Beane's unsigned or undrafted free agents.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they did that. Josh Allen's college roommate was on Buffalo's practice squad for a little bit.
Oh, is that Tanner Gentry?
That was, yes.
He was such a good player at Wyoming. I gotta get it.
Yep.
Another guy I wish we were talking about right now is Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. I was really sad to see him return to school because that guy had some fun tape.
Yeah, and then I heard that Indiana got a good transfer tight end. Did Stowers, did he stay at Vanderbilt or did he transfer out?
To my knowledge, he stayed at Vanderbilt.
No, he's there. He and Diego are back for another round.
Yep.
Okay.
Last dance.
So, yeah, I remember we were doing a 2026 draft episode, and I believe it's Wyoming. Yeah, Wyoming has a few transfers that are worth paying attention to. They have a transfer at quarterback. I think an Indiana tight end transferred, if I remember correctly. So there were a few, but there we go. Ball State to Wisconsin. Thanks, Bill. Tanner Kaziel.
Name's to watch.
And that's a tight end, right, Bill? Tanner Kaziel is a tight end, if I remember that correctly.
Yep.
Thank you for that. But let's close this podcast down. We've got another one coming at you in an hour. It is Newt, Owen, and myself. We're doing a 2-round mock. Just kind of having some fun and chilling on a Thursday night. But on behalf of special guest Max, thank you very much for coming on the channel. For Drew,
had a lot of fun.
Durst, myself, and the 37 podcasters at the Draft Professor. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.
So you guys still there?
Oh, it's interesting. I hit the end, but it's still going. So that is mildly amusing.
Huh. Well, some extra industry content, I guess.
Okay, I'll hit this button. Oh. Apparently, I had a poor internet connection. It would not let me end the stream.
Now, one interesting stat that I saw, courtesy to Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points, but a lot of times people will look at Colston Loveland and say, well, his stats don't really measure up. At least people who are looking at some of the analytics. But according to him, his 34.7 receiving yardage market share is the most by any power conference tight end in college football history. So pretty reputable source for that stat there. So while his gross yards and stats don't really measure up to Warren or Fannin, that market share for in terms of passing yardage for Michigan's putrid offense, it was historic in a sense.
Mm-hmm. It was insanely bad.
Yeah, so I guess this is why they tell you not to podcast off of a Wi-Fi connection. It literally is saying, well, you're not connected to the internet, so how could you possibly end your podcast? Yet, if you can hear my voice, you're hearing my voice through the internet. So
Right, you can podcast, but you can't end it.
Yep. So I am going to probably abruptly leave. So if this ends suddenly, my apologies if it seems rude.
Final countdown.
All right, boys. I'm going to gotta head out. Gotta get this Four Nations game on.
Oh yeah, excited to watch.
Yes.
Well, pleasure to meet both of you. Great podcast.
Yeah, you as well, man. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah,
sure,
good
me
talk,
too.
guys.
See you.
All right, see you guys later.